Hello everyone. Today's lecture is about economic policy and brief about economic policy. I would not get into the detail of economic policy, but the basic part of it that what was the economy during the British period, or rather I would say what was the economy of our country after the Britishers and during the colonial rule, and how we had suffered a setback in terms of economic growth and economic development when we had gained independence in 1947. So we would discuss little bit. I would not get into very extremely detail because I would briefly discuss. I would briefly talk about the the time. The rise of the economic structure, economic growth, and economic stability in our country. The various phases of economic growth started from 1991 when the new economic policy came into existence. Until date, there had been a lot of programs and policy measures which are looking into, or which rather focusing on focuses to stabilize the and enhance the GDP of a country. So it becomes it is important to, but before, and it is also about the relationship in when we talk further, it is also about the relationship which we are going to discuss between economic, social and public policy. So first of all, but in I have in my previous lectures I have briefly, I have discussed length and breadth at length and breadth about social policy as well as public policy, and I thought that later on I would take up economic policy. So today I will discuss about economic policy, the various aspects of it, important aspect of economic policy, and then I'll discuss the lecture would be of later on the lecture would center around economic, social and public policy, interrelationship or interdependence, or a mutual relation between all these policy. Now, if you talk about economic policies, what are economic policy? Economic policy is a course of action which is intended to influence or control the behavior of the economy. Economic policies are primarily implemented or typically implemented and administered by the government. Like all policies, whether it's social policy or whether it is public policy, economic policy too is implemented by the government. And if you talk about economic policies, like decisions made about the government spending and taxation, about the redistribution of income and resources from rich to poor, about the supply of money, talking about demand and supply, inflation, deflation, price rise, economic stability, economic growth. So the effectiveness of any economic policies can be assessed in two ways, as a positive and as well as normative positive and normative economies. Positive economy attempts to describe or it focuses on how the economy and economic policies work without restoring to value judgments about which results are best, and normative economics involves the use of value judgment to assess the performance of the economy and economic policies. So these are the two way of understanding or realizing, or rather I would say the way of assessing any policies. A prime concern of economic policy was to develop the country from economic backwardness and resolve the issues, the problems of massive poverty and lack of industries, then outdated tools in agricultural sector. So the country aimed to achieve a socialistic pattern of society, and the policy framework followed was excessive state intervention in market through a number of regulatory measures, controls, introduction of centralized planning, expansion of public investment in basic and key industries, starting more public sector undertakings, etc. So the overall approach was to achieve rapid economic development through state intervention in market, public investment as well as planning. And the system of economy visualized was a mixed economy comprising both the public and private sectors holding. When we talk about the British eras, the British eras India's economy and the because of the colonial rule, we had certain important aspect to discuss here. That is, first of all, the disruption of traditional economy. Colonialism led to integration of India's economy with the world economy, but in a very subservient manner. The economy policies followed by the British led to the rapid transformation of the Indian economy into colonial economy, whose nature structure was determined by the needs of the British people or the British economy. The 18th century was a period of transition, and the economy became more exposed to the world economy, and and as a colonial rule took root, the foundations were laid for a new company, or the foundations were laid for a new economy based on peasant exports and support from the global market, or from global industrious enterprises. So in India became a major market for British manufacturers, a principal source for raw materials and food, and an important entity of the British Empire. The pattern of trade dramatically changed during the 19th century. India had dominated world textile trade in the 18th century. It's lost its position in the 19th century. So the composition of trade changed. Export of textiles and import of bullion dominated the 18th century, and export of cotton cloth, cotton cloth dropped sharply from 1800, and import of machine made cloth and yarn expanded. So at the time of the World War I, Indians consumed 85% of cotton piece goods, fabrics made in standard, with and then manufactured in Lancashire. Textiles began to be replaced by new exportable articles such as indigo, opium, silk, tobacco, and cotton, and to a limited extent by salt, sugar, and saltpeter. The basic economic model of self-sufficient rural economy was largely disrupted. Then there is this impoverishment of the peasantry. The first to suffer was the agricultural sector, because India was a dominant agricultural based economy. With the grant of Diwani, that is the taxation rights of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa in 1765, the policy of East India Company to extract the largest possible revenue led to complete devastation of India's agrarian economy and the society in the Diwani province in a matter of in the few years. One indication of prevailing impoverishment and the general chaos were seen in the famines of 1769-70, in which about one-third of undivided Bengal's population was wiped off. The company replaced the existing land tenure system and introduced three different systems: the zamindari in the eastern India, the Roitwari in the southern and the western India, and in southern and western India, and the Mahalwari in the western Gangetic plain. The purpose was to secure maximum guaranteed land revenue returns at the expense of cultivators' well-being. The zamindari system or permanent settlement gave property rights to the zamindars, and revenue was fixed in perpetuity. The peasantry became tenants of zamindars. The Roitwari settlement gave property rights to the peasant, and the Mahalwari gave property rights to the dominant kinship lineages in the villages. In both the Roitwari and Mahalwari system, revenue was subjected to revision. In the zamindari areas, the peasants were left to the mercies of the zamindars, who raised rents to unbearable limits. The peasants were compelled to pay illegal cesses and were opposed in diverse ways. In the Roitwari and Mahalwari areas, the condition of the cultivators was no better. Here the government, took the place of the zamindars and levites excessive land revenue, which was fixed as high as one-third to one-half of the produce. So one of the main causes of increase in poverty and the deterioration of agriculture in the 19th century was heavy revenue assessment of the land. The rates fixed fell beyond the paying capacity of the cultivators. Ultimately, the cultivators had to rely on the support from the local money lender and informal source of credit. The farmers' assets got transferred to the money lenders. Landlords and rich farmers found lending far more profitable and safer than making productive investment in land they owned or controlled. There were thus errors of payment, mounting debt, increasing land sales, and disposition. However, subsequent research established that the effects of these changes were less spectacular than once imagined. Land transfers from the peasant to the professional lender marked the lender. Then there was this commercialization of agriculture. Commercialization of agriculture was another sign of progress towards capitalist agriculture. In many areas, a class of rich peasants developed because of commercialization and tenancy legislations, but most of them preferred to buy land and become landlords or to turn to money lenders or to turn to money lending. As a result, except in a few pockets, capitalist farming was slow to develop. Importantly, commercialization of agriculture did not lead to capitalist farming or improved technology. Its main consequences was the diversion of better soil, available water, and other resources from fruit crops to commercial crops. The growing commercialization of agriculture was also helped the money lenders merchant to exploit the cultivator. The poor peasant was forced to sell his produce just after the harvest and at whatever price he could get, as he had to meet the demands of the government. Now, this placed the peasantry at the mercy of the grain merchant, and who was able to dictate terms and who purchased his produce at a price much lower than the market. Thus, a large share of the benefit of the growing trade in agricultural products was being reaped by the merchant, who was often the village money lender. Then agricultural laborers, improvised cultivators, most of them small scale peasants or tenants at will and sharecroppers, had no resource or any other means of incentive to invest for the improvement of agriculture by using better cattle, seeds, more manure and fertilizers, and improved techniques of production. So the loss and overcrowding of land caused by deindustrialization and lack of modern industrial means compelled the landless peasants and ruined artisans and the artisan and handicraftsmen to become either tenants of the money lenders and zamindars by paying rack rent or agricultural labors or at starvation wages. So most of the colonial period, landlessness had been rising. Then there's lack of modernization. Here of the revenue that the colonial state secured, it spent very little on improving agriculture. It devoted almost its entire income to meet the needs of the British Indian administration, make payments of direct and indirect tribute to England, and serve the interest of British trade and industry. At a time when agriculture in developed countries was being modernized and reformed, there was a near absence of change in the technological and production base in the Indian agriculture sector. The basic set of agricultural implements remarks, in fact, Indian peasants continued to use the primitive implements they had for centuries. There were no modern means, no modern tools were being applied. There was hardly any investment in terracing, flood control, drainage, or desalination of soil. Irrigation was the only field in which some progress was made. Thus, the peasantry was crushed under the triple burden of the government, the zamindars or the landlords, and the money lender. After these three had taken their share, not much was left for the cultivators and his family to subsist on. Then it also ruined the artisans and the handicrafts. At the beginning of the British rule, in the mid 18th century, India supplied quarter of all manufactured goods produced in the world, and textiles was the chief export of India's European trade. However, British conquest destroyed the unity between the agriculture and the manufacturing sectors that characterized traditional Indian society. In fact, the village lost the autonomy and self-sufficiency. The oppression practiced by the East India Company and its servants on the craftsmen of Bengal during the second half of the 18th century, forcing them to sell their goods below the market price and to hire their services below the prevailing wages, compelled many of them to abandon their ancestral professions. So, in the wake of Industrial Revolution, there was a sudden collapse of urban handicrafts industry, which had for centuries made India's name byword in the European markets. Not only did this export demand gradually evaporate, but colonial rule opened India in the markets for the British manufactured goods. After 1813, the British imposed a policy of one-way free trade upon India, and the invasion of British manufacturers, in particular cotton textiles, followed immediately. Indian goods made with primitive techniques could not compete with goods produced on a mass scale by powerful steam operated machines. The worst hits were cotton, weaving and spinning industries. Other industries that suffered were silk and woolen textiles, metal, oil pressing, tanning, dyeing, etc. So, this led to deindustrialization or destruction of the indigenous industry. While India produced about 25% of the world's industrial output with introduction of railways, the destruction of Indian industries, particularly rural artisan industries, proceed even more rapidly. The railways enabled British manufacturers to reach and uproot the traditional industries in the remotest village of the country. The destruction of rural crafts broke up the union between agriculture and domestic industry in the countryside. This contributed to the decline of the self-sufficient rural economy. So, this blow to Indian handicraft textile industry in the early 19th century is believed to have pushed many industrial workers into other low-paying occupations, intensifying poverty. Does the rural artisan fail to find alternative measures and means or any kind of alternative employment because of the lack of growth of modern industries? So, craftsmen fell back on the land as tenants, sharecroppers and agricultural laborers. Then there was a status of modern industries. If you look into the status of modern industries under the British rule, the Indian industry suffered numerous constraints between the 1850s, when the first major industry started. In 1914, India created the world's largest jute manufacturing unit industry, fourth or fifth largest cotton textile industry, and the third largest railway network. Modern industrial processes, however, did not spread easily from one sector to another. Thus, at the time of independence, India was largely non-industrial and one of the world's poorest areas. A period that witnessed industrialization of Europe also witnessed deindustrialization of the Indian economy. Although all basic requirements for economic growth were available in India, such as skilled and cheap labor, capital market and spirit of enterprise, yet the economy could not regain the path it had traversed in the past. All this was largely due to the colonial rule and the policies that were followed to sustain that regime. Indeed, most analysis of the colonial India has attributed the unsatisfactory performance of the economy and the absence of modern industrial development to either British policy, which initiated or which inhabited local initiative. Every time colonial grip became weak due to crisis faced by the government, India industry thrived. This happened, for instance, when Britain was drawing into two world wars. The machine age in India began when textile, jute and coal mining industries were started in the 1850s. The first textile mill was opened in Bombay by Koeschi Nanaboy in 1853, and the first jute mill in Bengal in 1855. These industries gradually expanded. By first decade of the 20th century, India had 206 cotton mills employing nearly 1,96,000 persons. So in 1901, there were around over 36 jute mills employing nearly 1,15,000 persons. The coal mining industry also employed nearly 1 lakh person in 1906. Other mechanical industries which developed during the second half of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century were cotton and presses, cotton gins and presses, rice, flour and timber mills, leather tanneries, woolen textiles, sugar mills, iron and steel works, and such mineral industries such as salt, mica and saltpeter. Cement, paper, matches, sugar and glass industries developed during the 1930s. But all these industries, had a very stunted growth. Most of the modern industries were owned or controlled by the British capital. Only in the presence from the very beginning, only in the cotton textile industry did Indians have a very large presence from the very beginning, and in the 1930s the sugar industries were developed by the Indians. So there were many reasons for the domination of enterprising British managing agencies. Banks were also being controlled by the British people. The 19th century also witnessed the growth of plantation industries such as indigo, tea and coffee. They were almost exclusively owned by the Europeans, but indigo manufacturing was introduced into India at the end of the 18th century and flourished in Bengal and Bihar. It was used as dye in manufacturing textile. Peasants were compelled to cultivate indigo instead of food crops. This oppression of indigo planters was vividly portrayed in a famous Bengali writer's work. The tea industry developed in Assam. The tea industry was developed in Assam, and however there had been a lot of there had been the rise of modern industries and modern machinery, modern setup, modern establishment, but nevertheless it created a lot of chaos, and the economy was still not very much it was not extremely it was not extremely The tea industry developed in Assam, Bengal, South India and the hills of Himachal Pradesh. It was assisted by the government with grants of rent-free and other facilities. However, in time the use of tea spread across India, and it became an important item of export. Coffee plantations developed during this period in South India too, and overall, so I would say the industrial progress in India was, though exceedingly slow, but nevertheless it was taking place and it was happening at its own pace. Both in terms of production and employment, the level of industrial development was stunted at the beginning and paltry if we compare to the developed countries of the time. It did not compensate the output and employment loss of the handicraft industries that it had displaced. Industrial development was mainly confined to cotton, jute industries and tea plantations in the 1930s. There had been some development of iron and steel industries after 1907, but as late as 1946, cotton and jute textiles accounted for nearly 30% of all workers employed in factories, and more than 55% of the total value added by the manufacturing unit. So the share of modern industries in the national income at the end of British rule was only 7.5% in terms of production as well as employment. The modern industrial development of India was insignificant as compared with the economic development of other countries, or in keeping with the requirements of India's economic development. if we look into, if we talk about the economic development and under the market interventionist policy, so this was the condition that I had just mentioned about, that what happened during the British rule and what was going around. Although with the rapid rise of, industries and certain economic growth and economic development were being taken up with this interventionist policies from 1947 to 1991, and then 1991 onwards, of course, the new economic policy came into existence. So the economic policy framework of India during the late 1940s had the following features. These were the important aspect. The prime object, of course, was to transform India into a socialist pattern of society. At the same time, the basic agenda or the basic point of discussion was to stabilize the economy, to bring in modern tools for agriculture growth and development, to strengthen the agricultural sector, to initiate or to establish more of secondary and later on tertiary sector. The 5-year plans were created which would invested more to make the aggregated economy more viable, more productful for the peasants with the benefits. So, the centralized planning and 5-year plans were formulated for the development of the country, and it was believed that through planning and implementation of 5-year plans, the country can achieve rapid economic growth within a short period of time. This was a major objective of 5-year plans, to accelerate the economic growth, economic development by stabilizing, by making India self-sufficient and self-reliant, by establishing modern means as well as bringing up more industrial setup. In agriculture sector, public segment was promoted in areas such as irrigation, research and extension services to promote private agricultural production. Then a complex system of regulatory instruments aimed initially at conserving foreign exchange, but in the course of time extended to prevent the growth of monopoly houses, which was later on implemented. So, the other measures which included were a policy of fostering small and medium industries to help diffuse ownership, the use of state power to regulate the inflow of private foreign capital, and the adoption of a regime of administered prices in key sectors to regulate both the instabilities and the presumed inequalities of the market system. If a restrictive or I would say a restrictive industrial policy was followed, and the objective of this industrial policy of the government of India between 1948 and 1990 were increasing production and productivity, especially in the priority sectors, bringing about regionally balanced industrial development, encouraging small scale industries to generate employment and bring about, or rather to hone their skills in to bring about, to foster entrepreneurial talents, preventing concentration of economic power by the control of monopolies, limiting and controlling foreign investments in domestic industry, at the same time pursuing self-reliance through import substitution oriented policies, and carving out a central role for the public sector. So, a system of industrial licensing and a system of income licensing were introduced, and these policies created barriers to entry, provided indiscriminate protection to domestic industry from foreign competition, created an atmosphere to exist for sick and non-viable units, imposed a system of physical controls, giving the incentives of rent seeking acted, and this had ultimately led to the notorious license system. However, in foreign trade, the choice between import substitution oriented strategies and export promotion oriented strategies, or a suitable combination of the two strategies, had been an important element of the policy. So, in 1950s, the emphasis was on import substitution strategy. During the 1960s, along with export orientation, a heavy import substitution oriented strategy was also followed. The imposition imposition of import controls, licensing and restrictions were widely used to restrict imports. The acute shortage of foreign exchange sometimes, or rather I would say the acute shortage of foreign exchange, import of technology and foreign capital had the acute shortage of foreign exchange, the severe restrictions in the use of foreign exchange, import of technology and foreign capital had prevented the process of technological development and flow of foreign capital very smoothly, which and they were posed certain hindrances which made India, or rather forced India to remain in the vicious circle of low capital investment, backward technology and economic backwardness. Stopped today's lecture, and tomorrow I'll talk about more of the basic aims and objectives of economic policy, and how policies are being formulated, and then what are the upcoming policies, like if you talk about the new economic policy of 1991, 2014 and 2020. Thank you.